Welcome to Estuate's webinar titled Advancing Agile Development and Subsetting. Today's presenters are Mark Hebert, Chief Operating Officer, Estuate, and Brian Babineau, Vice President, ESG. Mark has 35 years in senior leadership roles in the enterprise software industry. Prior to his current role, he was VP for 11 years at Oracle, President of Sierra Atlantic, and Chief Marketing Officer at Virtusa. Brian is Vice President of Research and Analyst Services at ESG. He, along with ESG's Director of Research, is responsible for driving ESG's market research and publishing agendas across all technology segments, including data management. We'll be emailing a link to the recorded webinar to all that registered. Thank you, Mark and Brian, for presenting, and I'll turn the webinar over to you now.
Thank you very much, Mike. Good morning, everybody. We have a timely topic I think that you'll find interesting and punchy. This will be about a half-an-hour webinar, and we appreciate your participation this morning. So we want to talk about Agile development, which is a very active part of IT services these days, and how Agile development can be assisted by the strategy of subsetting to create more effective, nimble, agile test systems for development and testing purposes. So we'll talk about some agile trends that Brian is going to take you through based on some primary research that his company ESG has done. Then we'll get into a little bit about how subsetting fits into agile development, and a little bit about our practice and experience in doing subsetting using the IBM Optim platform, which we view as the perfect platform for this kind of work. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Brian to talk about some of his research.
Great, thanks, Mark. And just Enterprise Strategy Group, our goal as a research and analyst firm is to try to keep our pulse on the marketplace of interesting trends that are driving purchasing and investment behaviors. And so today we're going to look a little bit about why we think the concept and principles of Agile development are more critical than ever, and why we think organizations are going to start to use them more ubiquitously inside their company. But more importantly, what are some of the impediments that organizations need to overcome in order to achieve that full-scale agility? What benchmarks they may be using to actually measure how quickly they can accelerate app cycle times. So if we go to the next slide, just the backdrop. This is the principles of Agile development have been published for more than a decade now, and yet we still see organizations only using some of them or deploying a few of them. But rather than go through all of these in detail, and as Mike and Mark said, the slides will be available. I think it's important to put these up for many business and application owners, as well as the associated teams that do a lot of the app development work. There are things in here that may get overlooked, and I've underlined a few. Terms such as frequently changing requirements, rapid delivery, and we forget the word rapid means very quick, very streamlined. We talk about more consistent adoption and cooperation. Constant pace is another thing that comes up here. Is how do we get our software cycles much faster, more streamlined, so that the app is delivered, or the application portfolio is delivered to the user base within months as opposed to years. And the shorter these cycles get, the more business value that's derived from the overall application portfolio. One of the reasons why we think it's important to go back to these is highlighted on the next slide that we have, which is most organizations tend to reorganize around, or change their development processes when there's major application upgrades and or underlying infrastructure refreshes that occur. Now, right now, there's a couple of things happening. First, we believe we are on the cusp of major application deployments, and thus we think organizations are going to evaluate, maybe you guys are already, what you can do to become more agile or capture some of these principles. The second are the changing business requirements for applications. So we always look at staffing trends inside of technology departments, and we're seeing obviously more mobile app developers, mobile enablement of existing applications being added. we're starting to see more, the capitalization of HTML5 within applications. We, of course, know, the devices, the device proliferation and things of that nature. So the last big trend here that will probably participate in the cycle is this concept of big data, where we're trying to get more analytics or derive more information and insight out of machine-generated data, out of user-generated data. How do we make sense of it to either generate revenue or streamline some process, business processes? But we're on the cusp or catalyst. Now, as we transition and take a look at, another piece of data from ESG research on the next slide, before we get into how are we going to go about solving, these emerging or evolving business requirements, some of the context for app development has changed in our opinion. And the biggest thing that's changed has been the use of cloud services. So what you see here is, the same survey run 2 different times by Enterprise Strategy Group across a global organization. I think the response set was just over 600 in both. But if you look at the use of software as a service techniques and solutions, it's gone up quite healthily from 2011 to 2012. The same thing is infrastructure as a service, where we're consuming compute, maybe an app development framework or storage over the internet. And while we believe a majority of organizations aren't completely moving their entire portfolio to the cloud, I think that we're far too early on this, and some people believe there's far too much risk from a security standpoint. Small components go to software as a service, or some of the development activities capitalize on resources. Here's what we think the increased adoption of and usage of some of these smaller cloud services means to the overall app development process. And if you look at on the next slide here, what we've really talked about is cloud has, what we believe is these framework implications. First of all, when you consume software as a service, there's a benchmark that is set for how quickly there's release cycles. You don't see, smaller applications delivered via software as a service go through 18 to 24-month release cycles. There are updates on even sometimes a weekly or at least a monthly basis. Although some of those aren't custom applications and the changes are easy, you still have a user base that gets used to frequent updates, more succinct cycles, better release schedules, things that are delivered on time. The other thing is that fixes don't take a large change management process. There can be user testing done along the way. So what we see here from a cloud standpoint, not only does it introduce a new way of consuming, but it also introduces an entirely new cost absorption. How fast can we do these? How inexpensively can we consume applications as organizations? And although only, we still see only about 7% of IT budgets being spent on cloud technology, the real implications, we believe, is setting benchmarks for internal app developers and IT departments and their business owners of how do they get better so they can deliver at least 80% of what the alternative is, which is the software as a service or the cloud model. So it's a great framework of why we need more agile development, why we need to be a little bit more speedy in what we do from a release cycle and a fix cycle and a change management perspective. It also gives us a peg for how do we manage cost. So when we look at why do we need to take a look at our own internal development processes, and where does a lot of the cost come from? Where does a lot of the cycle time delay come from? We believe it's a combination of a couple of things. First is the amount of infrastructure and data that needs to be procured and managed in order to get our release times better. When we ask organizations, as evident by this data point, where we're asking about test databases versus production databases, what you can see here as a lot of the lines line up is that for every production database, we have a similar amount of test databases. And more frequently, in the greater than 80% side of things, these databases, these test databases are the same exact size as our production databases. Right? They have the same information, whether it be confidential information, whether it be critical reporting information. There's very few organizations today that actually shrink the amount of data that they do testing on, that get more, that can create their test environments in a much more frequent pace in order to get user-accepted testing, in order to get their change management processes on a much faster cycle. And as we talked about, there's a cost associated with all of these copies, right? We have storage, we buy bigger servers, we have to back up the test environment. All of a sudden, when we have, when we tip the scale in terms of test databases, the cost and the time introduce a number of factors. The next slide just talks about where those factors are. It's, look, we're trying to deal with huge database growth challenges right now. The bigger the primary, the bigger your test environments. The bigger your test environments, the more risk there are in a compliance and security standpoint. The more challenges there are to do data protection and disaster recovery. There's more staffing required in order to create these environments. And of course, there's the time delay aspect, which is you have to make sure you're always current. You're making sure that your administrators are patching. And these secondary environments are where the delays and the non-agile processes start to manifest themselves. So we got to find a better way, because we have to keep in mind our benchmark has been set. There are people out there, our user base, that are used to more frequent updates, more frequent releases than ever before. My last thought is we don't have to solve all the problems in the cycle, but when we move to the next slide here, how do we get to a better spot, and how do we get to the more agile? Think about that first slide I shared. Constant pace, daily communications. How do we get to that? We can't wait a week for a test environment to be set up if we want to get to be more agile. So one of the thoughts that we have in recommendations, and Mark's going to take you through some ideas, but we believe that subsetting and helping control that secondary environment from a cost standpoint, from the time it takes to get it set up standpoint, and from the agility to do it more frequently, so that the ultimate benefit is much better release cycles. You can still run your user acceptance testing. You're just doing so on a smaller data set that's much more efficient and much more cost effective. And of course, if you want the option, when you take the risk factor out of that secondary environment, if cloud is the benchmark and you have too much security concerns over cloud, you should probably mitigate the security concerns inside your own firewall as well, which is keep that secondary information masked or encrypted, more controlled, right? The smaller it is, the more cost effective, the more secure, and the more you can have control over it. So a lot of people ask ESG whether the implications of cloud, isn't it changing the whole environment? Our feeling is, look, think of cloud as a way to get sharper inside of your own organization, and sharper in terms of agile development. There's no better time given what we expect from a mobile enablement, from a workforce productivity standpoint in our app cycles over the next couple of years. And I know, Mark, you guys share some of the same things and bring subsetting and some of these other technologies to market. So I'd love to hear what you guys are doing to solve these particular challenges.
Okay, well, that's a very nice lead-in, I think, to some of the experiences that we've had. So I think it's very helpful, Brian, to have some fresh data in terms of what customers are seeing and experiencing today. It's clear that the concept of agile development is gaining momentum. It's here to stay, simply because IT organizations have the imperative to get more done, more software out the door, and the biggest bottleneck, the biggest obstacle to getting that done is the large and growing amount of data that's sitting in their production systems that makes the whole process of agile development unwieldy. So we really think that subsetting, I agree with you, subsetting is a terrific strategy to address that specific problem, that bottleneck in agile development. So in terms of what goals should an organization have for subsetting, how does subsetting fit in well to agile development? Here are some objectives that we're trying to address with our clients when we enter into these projects. So the concept here, number one, is to take an unwieldy, large production environment and slim it down so that you can create much smaller versions of that database that are fully functional, but that can be provisioned really quickly and refreshed even more quickly ideally by the specific individuals, the developers, the testers, the QA people who are in control of those environments, who need them the most. So a self-service concept here, I think, is very powerful in terms of the ability to be very agile in the development cycle. And so these objectives, along with the optional idea of masking that data as needed for security compliance purposes, this frames what we try to do with our projects. And we've had a lot of experience in subsetting, both in agile environments and in more traditional ones. I want to talk a little bit about the process of test data management now and how we see that working. So the traditional approach, as you are all very well aware, is to simply clone production. And that process of cloning, depending on the size of the production database, can be very painful. Oftentimes, I've seen organizations take up to a month to provision a new test environment. I can't imagine what they're doing for a month. I don't even want to think about it. But you know, it always takes at least a couple of days. And so that is the principal bottleneck to an agile development cycle. So a better alternative is a subsetting strategy using a test data management methodology. And this is approximately how it works, although there's a lot of permutations for how to do this. And a flexible platform like IBM Optim can be used to do flexible subsetting. But here's a templatized approach. So you start off with a production database. You make a copy of it, and that's going to become your target for the creation and the provisioning of non-production systems. You extract from that the test data that you're probably going to use using flexible rules and an extraction engine like IBM Optim. So now you've got these rules that can be used to extract the data. You can save that data for reuse, or you can just save the rules for ongoing extraction. Once you've pulled the data out, then you simplify that clone by truncating the extracted tables, resizing the table spaces, and that now gives you a very small, lean, gold copy that you can use for provisioning test systems and development and so on. So then you start the process of cloning that master copy for whatever systems you want, and then using a load process, you take whatever test data that you've extracted and you populate specifically for the objectives of that environment. And then in addition to that, as you begin testing, facilities that offer you the ability to compare before and after snapshots of that data make the testing process easier to do, so that the subsetting tools that you use can actually facilitate the testing process through comparisons. So the upshot of what you can accomplish with this is pretty powerful. So take a production database with, say, 200 gigabytes of data, which is small by today's standards, and particularly in many ERP and CRM environments. And in this example, assume you've got 5 non-production copies right now. So normally, then you'd end up with, you know, a terabyte of non-production data. Strategy, you might be able to performance testing, system testing, but you probably don't for development, training, UAT, and so on. And so having a nice slim subset can get you a net savings of 50% or even more, depending on how many subsets you've got and what the real purposes of your testing is. And on top of that, it's important to remember that the security and compliance issues are becoming more and more a part of non-production systems these days, particularly if you have a lot of third-party people accessing that data. So you've got an offshore model where development testing needs to be done, or third parties that are under contract with you. So you want to go through a process of identifying the sensitive data in those non-production systems and masking them such that the application is still fully functional, but none of the data that is sensitive can be accessed and misused. So tools like IBM Optim have very flexible algorithms for this purpose in a wide range of different types of of data that needs to be masked but still be wholly integral and useful as a business object. So there's a lot of different types of algorithms that you get, and a couple of examples of how data needs to be masked intelligently is, for example, with a customer record or a patient record. In this example, you would want to mask not only the patient number, the social security number, the name, but you might also want to mask the address, and the address itself, for testing purposes, may need to be a whole address, meaning that you'd have to mask it as a street, city, state, and zip code that is actually a valid collection of fields. So masking that information isn't necessarily just a field for field masking. It actually has some contextual meaning that needs to be preserved. A second example might be in terms of employee or customer information, where the data is proliferated across multiple tables in the application. So you want to be able to mask that data in each place, meaning you need to understand the table structures, you need to know where the data is duplicated, and you need to mask it consistently. And that may be actually true in an integration test environment where you've got multiple applications with that redundant data, and you need to keep those multiple applications in sync. So when you mask, it has to be consistently across those applications. So in terms of a little bit of our experience in doing these kinds of projects, we really believe as a specialist we're one of the world's leaders in executing these kinds of projects. We've done over 100 similar projects over the last few years in partnership with IBM, using the IBM Optim platform, which is by far the dominant platform in the industry for this purpose. And the evidence is in a recent Gartner report that we're happy to provide as part of this, showing that Optim has about 5 times the market share of anybody else in this area, with about 75% market share. So the way that you approach this in terms of an agile environment is, from a top down. So if you want to start introducing subsetting, the right thing to do is to pick a high priority project that maybe is bite-sized initially, and go through a process of configuring an enterprise platform like Optim for subsetting with the right kind of architecture and power behind it. Do some analysis of the application to really understand the business objects to be subsetted, and the creation of effective templates for extracting those business objects as whole entities that are self-sufficient when you do the subset, and also build the business rules, the selection criteria for how you're going to extract a subset of that data that's thinly sliced but still fully functional for your testing purposes. And then go through a pilot project to execute the subsetting strategy and do knowledge transfer so that your organization is fully functional and can sustain it on its own going forward. So just a word about IBM Optim so you get a sense of the platform nature here. So Optim comprises a core family of 5 products. There are 4 key products on the bottom here, that 2 of which are for production databases on the lower right. That's for archiving and decommissioning applications in production. And the 2 we're talking about this morning are really the non-production ones for test development. So there's a product called Test Data Management, and there's a second sister product called Data Privacy that works hand in hand for masking. So those are the 2 products we use in a lot of these projects with IBM and our mutual customers. What's really powerful about this set of products is that it's truly a platform. By that, I mean that it works in virtually any application environment, supports virtually any storage systems, so the data can be anywhere, deployed on any operating system, using virtually any database, modern or legacy, and maybe even using some of the leading ERP packages. And in fact, Optim comes prepackaged with templates for all the ones in orange and green here. So this is a true enterprise platform. It supports mainframes and distributed systems both, And we've executed subsetting and data privacy in a really wide range of environments, so we know it works very well. So to wrap this up, it's quite a simple, intuitive thing. Agile development is here to stay. The key bottleneck in Agile development is the sheer amount of data that's growing rapidly in production systems that needs to be managed effectively to do Agile development and nimble testing. You do that through a subsetting strategy using a tool like IBM Optim to create rifle shot data subsets. You want to be able to provision them and refresh them as quickly as possible with a self-service approach so that you're not relying on DBAs, sysadmins, and others in the organization that are very matrixed and take forever to kind of coordinate. And that allows you to do faster, more nimble testing and faster test cycles, which is really the essence of Agile development. And oh, and by the way, you oftentimes get collateral benefit in terms of disk storage savings, oftentimes that can deliver a terrific ROI that allows you to pay for itself. So that's it in a nutshell. I'm going to stop there and open it up for questions.
Great. Thank you, Mark and Brian, for presenting. To the attendees, if you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and ask them in the GoToWebinar panel. There's a little section called questions. Open that up and ask your questions. Mark, we have our first question coming in. Can the subsetting strategies described be justified on the basis of hard dollar cost savings alone?
Actually, the answer to that is yes. This is a really powerful tool. If you've got a terabyte of data and you can subset down to 10% of it, and you can imagine how many copies that you're running in non-production right now, you can actually generate disk savings in multiple terabytes if you have an aggressive strategy. And even though terabytes are cheap today, the fully loaded cost of managing that disk space is quite a bit more expensive than that. And so the combination of the labor savings you get as well as the savings in disk storage, possibly it's cost avoidance. You don't have to buy as much new disk. You can reuse what you have. Oftentimes you can generate an ROI that pays back in less than a year in terms of the licenses and the services associated with subsetting.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mark. Brian, this one's for you. How prevalent are Agile development practices today in IT organizations, and how do you expect the trend to continue?
So I would say right now we see Agile development being relatively, what's the best word here, spotty at best. So you see some new applications that are only a couple years old being done and run in Agile development processes, and then you see some components. But when you look at a lot of major applications, we're still seeing 18 to 24-month release cycles, 6-month bug fix programs, or 3 to 6 month bug programs, changes. And we want to see more of that as through the next evolution. And I can't tell you how many people we get where their SAP cycles are still 18 to 24 months for either new modules or for updates. And it just it takes too long for people to procure hardware or to get the the secondary environment set up. It's not as prevalent as we would hope it to be right now. We certainly see the benchmarks being, people want to get down to literally daily collaborations and monthly releases.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brian. Next question, again for you, Brian. How big of a bottleneck is software testing in the ability of organizations to deploy software?
Well, I think aside from actually creating the environment to run the testing, getting the actual tests done are relatively cumbersome if there's not a good process. But we think if you aggregate setting up the environment and actually executing testing, most of the time is spent on the former. And most people now who know what they're going to run for user groups, what exactly to do. But it's just getting the environment. I can't tell you how many times people say we're ready to set up our test environment, and they have to go procure 2 or 3x the hardware in order to actually make it work to get functional. So it's usually the upfront work before people get hands-on. But it's it can be a big part of an overall project budget from a time and financial perspective.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Mark, are the IBM Optim tools pre-integrated with any Agile development software tools? How important is that integration?
Well, I think we're still in the early days of true integration, but there is some packaged integration between Optim and the IBM Rational testing tool set, and a little bit with the HP Mercury tool set as well. So you can sort of conceive of automated end-to-end testing using those upfront testing tools integrated with Optim for subsetting, and you do get some basic automation today. And then in some of our projects, we add services to make that integration tighter. Predefined scripts for end-to-end testing, that sort of thing.
Okay, thanks, Mark. I'm going to throw this next one out to the both of you. How well proven is subsetting as a software testing practice?
Brian, you want to start off on that?
Yeah, I think it's starting. It was an early technology 4 or 5 years ago, but now it's especially being in the hands. You saw some independent vendors solving this problem in emerging companies, but now with it in the hands of the likes of IBM and as Mark just pointed out, integration with some development tools. It's fairly mature. With a good amount of, we used to use it, and we used to use database tools to do this, but there were some cumbersome and licensing issues, situations that it got. But now it's in the hands of some really formidable, solution providers. It's advanced quite a bit. I would say we're in the mature phase here.
Yeah, so I was surprised to see some of Brian's data showing that there hasn't been as much implementation of subsetting as you might think, given how powerful it is. And when you look at the market share numbers in the Gartner report that I referenced, that last September report, the market penetration for these products, I think, is still fairly light. Maybe if you look at, say, the Fortune 500, I'll bet not more than 10% are really leveraging these tools yet. And so while I think I agree with Brian that we've kind of crossed the chasm in terms of product development lifecycle here, acceptance lifecycle, there's still a lot of opportunity ahead of us. And I think it's also true that many organizations have started dabbling with subsetting, but haven't radiated it out to the whole organization yet. So there's still a lot of adoption left, even in those companies that have started deploying.
Great. Okay. Thank you, guys. There are no more questions. Should you have questions after the webinar, feel free to reach out to Mark and Brian. Their contact information is there on the screen. As mentioned before, we recorded this webinar, and we'll be sending it out by email to all those that registered. And that pretty much wraps up our webinar. Thank you, Mark and Brian, for presenting, and thank you to the attendees for attending. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.